Hi everyone, before I dive in, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reaches. It's good to know I'm not alone. Thank you. Now, let me tell you everything. If my story moves you, please hit that subscribe button. It means more than you know because for so long, I felt invisible. My name is Jet Grayson Caldwell, and this is how the truth finally set me free. After my grandfather's funeral, my dad inherited $400 million, and the first thing he did was look me in the eye and say, "You're useless now," before throwing me out of the only home I'd ever known. 24 hours later, I sat in a lawyer's office, and she laughed in my father's face, asking, "Did you even read the will?" My dad went pale because the will said everything he feared most. The rain hadn't let up all afternoon, clinging to the stained glass windows of All Souls Church, streaking down in crooked lines that blurred the colors until the saints and angels looked like they were weeping. I sat in the back row, clutching the folded program with my grandfather Everett's face printed on it, his smile calm, steady, as if he knew he would outlast all of this. The organ's low hum filled the vaulted ceiling, and in that cavernous hush, I told myself to stay composed, to say goodbye with dignity. But then my father stood up. Sterling Caldwell, the new heir, the man who had just been handed $400 million, stepped into the pulpit with that perfect smile, his teeth glinting under the dim light, speaking of our family's legacy and giving back to the community. But not once did my name leave his lips, not once. My chest tightened as I remembered Everett's hand on my shoulder years ago at the Asheville Art Market, his voice telling me, "Wealth only matters when it flows toward the vulnerable." Yet my father's speech hollowed those words into mockery. When the service ended, the guests crowded him, artists, entrepreneurs, and local philanthropists praising the new pillar of Asheville, while I tried to thank the people who had admired Everett, but they orbited Sterling now like moths circling a flame. The Caldwell mansion glowed that evening, fire roaring in the hearth, guests sipping brandy, laughter bouncing against the carved walnut walls. Though it should have felt warm, I felt chilled as Sterling stood in the center, a monarch basking in a coronation. Eloise, our old housekeeper, brushed past me quietly and whispered, "Mr. Everett locked certain things away in the library, don't let them clear it out." Her warning lodged in my chest like a secret note slipped under a door. I slipped down the corridor to the library, only to find the handle stiff, newly locked. When I asked, one of the staff shook his head, saying, "Mr. Sterling's orders." I placed my palm on the oak door anyway, silently promising my grandfather I would return the right way, through proof and truth, not through desperation. When I turned, Sterling was waiting for me, his polished smile gone, his eyes steel as he asked, "Do you know why I didn't mention you today?" Though I searched for an answer, he didn't wait, his voice cutting clean, "Because you're useless, a dreamer, a burden." He leaned closer, the smell of whiskey sharp, and added, "By sunrise, I want you gone, out of this house, out of my way." Something inside me cracked, not collapse, but the splintering of an old illusion as I carried a box of Everett's old finance books down the grand staircase, the carved banister gleaming in the firelight, each step heavier than the last. Outside, the rain lashed at the family crest etched into the stone pillars as I held the one thing my father had given me, a heavy, expensive watch, staring at it like a cuff locked around my wrist. I started the car with the box beside me, and through the rain-streaked windshield, I glimpsed Everett's portrait in the stained glass. For a fleeting second, I could have sworn he nodded. I pulled out of the gates, headlights slicing the downpour, my chest burning with grief, humiliation, and a strange ember of defiance. 3 days later, the storm had passed, yet the sky still carried a heavy grayness, as if even the heavens hadn't decided whether to grieve or to move forward. I found myself inside a drafty loft downtown, its brick walls rough, its pipes bare, the scent of aged timber rising from the floorboards. It was no mansion, but at least it was mine for the moment. I ripped open a box of Everett's books, searching for something steady, and that's when I saw it, a hardcover titled Value and Values, its spine oddly thick. My pulse spiked as I opened it, and a sealed envelope slid free, pressed with Everett's wax initials. My hands shook as I broke it open. His handwriting was unsteady yet legible. "The will protects those who protect others. If you are cast aside, seek out Amara Holt. The right path will never leave you alone." For the first time since the funeral, I felt breath release from deep inside me. My grandfather hadn't abandoned me, he had anticipated all of this. That night, I removed the watch my father had forced on me and listed it for sale. I watched the second hand sweep its last arc on my wrist before I laid it down. It was no longer a gift, only a shackle traded away for survival. The next morning, I met Micah in a tucked-away cafe between art galleries, the kind Everett always loved. We sat at a scarred wooden table while the espresso machine hissed like an old train. I told him everything, the funeral, my father's words, the hidden letter. He listened silently, jaw tight, before asking, "Do you want revenge, or do you want to build something that lasts?" His question struck hard. I realized Everett had never prepared me for vengeance but for responsibility. I told Micah my plan: protect the letter, reach out to this lawyer Amara Holt, and stand firm even if Sterling tried to smear me. Micah nodded. Then don't fight him in the shadows. Build in the open. Asheville knows who your grandfather was. That evening, Eloise called, her voice hushed under static. Sterling had sealed the library and changed the locks on Everett's office. He was preparing an inventory, but she had managed to scan some papers. I'll send them, she said quickly. And be careful, a contractor he trusts is being lined up. Gratitude caught in my throat as I realized the risk she was taking for me. Later that night, a courier arrived, and inside the envelope was a copy of a will addendum in Everett's handwriting. One phrase leapt out, circled in heavy ink: the trust opens only when two push together. 2 keys. 2 signatures. My fingers pressed against the page, my thoughts racing. Did this mean Sterling couldn't access the fortune without me? I pinned Everett's letter to the brick wall above my desk beside the new document. With a marker, I sketched 3 columns: legal, Amara, public, community project, cultural center. My mission board. My vow. I switched off the light, the neon from the gallery outside scattering fractured colors across the wall. Tomorrow I would call Amara. Tomorrow I would discover what Everett had truly set in motion. But as I lay down on the creaking bed, one question lingered: what exactly did 2 push together mean, and why did I feel that one of those 2 had to be my father? The next day, Amara Holt's office rose in glass walls that framed the mountains under a pale blue haze, their ridges sharp against the dawn. The faint scent of cedar and ink filled the space, the kind of atmosphere where every word mattered. I sat across from her, pressing my palms to my knees to stop them from trembling. On the polished steel table lay a folder marked with Everett's seal. Amara slid the documents toward me. Your grandfather included a dual signature clause, she explained, her voice precise and steady. Every dollar from the $400 million fund for the French Broad Cultural Center requires authorization from both you and your father. Neither of you can move a cent alone. The words landed like lead in my chest. For a moment, I thought I'd misunderstood, but there it was, underlined in black ink. And then something even more shocking: if the 2 co-executors entered into public conflict within the first 12 months, the fund would split automatically. Half would flow to Asheville's charities, and the other half would come directly to me. Sterling would be erased from the equation entirely. Before I could even process it, the table's screen flickered to life. Sterling's face appeared, framed by the oak-paneled office back at the Caldwell estate, a wall of whiskey bottles glowing behind him. His voice slid through, smooth as always. This is absurd, he said, though his jaw was tight. Amara's eyes didn't flicker. Did you skip section 7.2, Mr. Caldwell? She asked, and then read aloud the trigger clause about public disputes. I watched my father's expression shift from smugness to something close to panic. He tried to sound commanding: I will contest this in court. She leaned forward. By filing, you create the very public dispute that strips you of control. The clause is self-executing. The moment the community hears of it, reporters will line up at your gates. I sat still, absorbing the symmetry of Everett's design. My grandfather had forced Sterling into a corner where the only way to win was to cooperate, and cooperation was the last thing my father knew how to do. Then Amara pointed out another section: note the timing. The successor had to claim their role within 72 hours after the funeral. You barely made it, Jet. That was deliberate. Everett wanted to be sure you acted on your own accord. The realization settled over me with a strange calm. Everett hadn't just left me instructions. He had tested whether I was willing to claim them. And I had. I picked up the pen and signed the acknowledgement, accepting my role as co-executor. The ink bled slightly into the paper, the stroke shaky but final. Amara said, fixing me with a steady gaze, remember, this authority is not about ego. It exists to protect the people Everett cared about. Don't let anyone drag it into the mud. When the call ended, I stood to leave, my mind heavy with the responsibility I had just assumed. That was when my phone buzzed. It was Eloise. Her voice was low, urgent. Sterling's already moving. He's contacting a contractor he's used before. The same one Everett marked as unreliable. He's building a maze of shell companies. Check the 3rd subsidiary on his list. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, staring at the Blue Ridge Mountains through the office glass. The battle had shifted. It was no longer just about law and inheritance. The fight was about the lifeblood of a project meant for the city, and it would play out on construction sites and boardrooms and across newspaper columns. I walked out, clutching the thick folder, the sun breaking weakly through retreating clouds. I knew the next move was mine. A week later, my loft walls were covered in notes, maps, and highlighted documents. The neon glow from the gallery across the street painted the papers in restless colors. Every path I traced led back to the same name, Crestview Builders. Everett had circled it in red years ago. Now Sterling was pushing it to the front line. He arrived unannounced one evening, stepping into the loft as if he still owned every room I breathed in. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile polished at charity galas. "Blood is blood, Jet," he said, resting a hand on the back of my chair. "Why make this harder than it needs to be? Sign off on these contracts. I'll cover your living expenses. You won't have to lift a finger." I looked at him, at the suit tailored too perfectly, at the glint of control in his eyes. "I'm not here to be on your payroll," I answered. "Open the books. Make them public. Every contract, every line item." The smile froze. For the first time, I felt him measure me, not as a son to dominate, but as an obstacle to remove. 2 days later, we sat across from each other at his lawyer's office. The mahogany table gleamed, and on it lay the contract with Crestview Builders. His attorney, a man with sharp glasses and sharper tone, pushed it toward me. "It's routine," he said. "You're young. You don't understand how deals get done." I scanned the numbers, the padded costs, the vague subcontracting clauses, the smell of varnished wood mixed with the scent of manipulation. I pushed the contract back. Independent audit. Every dollar accounted for. The attorney scoffed. "This is how you repay your father, by dragging his reputation through dirt?" Just then, my phone vibrated. An email from Eloise. Attached was a scan of Everett's own notes, his pen stroke slashing across the company's name, "Not to be trusted." My pulse quickened. I printed the page and slid it across the table. "My grandfather warned me about this exact firm," I said. "He anticipated you, Sterling." For once, my father had no ready words. The room stiffened. The attorney shifted uncomfortably, sensing the ground shifting under his feet. But Sterling's counterpunch came faster than I expected. The very next morning, the local paper carried an anonymous column, "Caldwell Air Sabotages Community Project for Personal Gain." The headline dripped poison. At a cafe, I heard whispers. At the grocery store, people stared longer than usual. He was weaponizing the public eye, painting me as selfish. I felt the walls closing in until Micah stepped in. He posted an essay on his architecture blog, "Transparency is not obstruction. Jet Grayson is safeguarding the standards this community deserves." The piece struck a chord, spreading among artists and small business owners. The tide, at least partially, began to shift. People started asking whether there was more behind the headlines. That night, I drove past the construction site by the lake. Steel frames rose like ribs against the sky, cranes groaning under the weight of promise. I stood in the dirt, listening to the clang of metal and the distant rush of the river, and told myself I had to hold the line. As I turned back toward my car, the phone rang again. A voice I didn't recognize, low and deliberate, whispered, "He won't stop at contracts or headlines. He's going to use dirtier methods to bring you down. Watch yourself." The call cut off. I stood there, staring at the shadows stretching across the unfinished ground. The real battle hadn't even started yet. By the time a month had passed since the funeral, I had learned to keep my phone close and my answers sharper. Sterling was no longer content with quiet maneuvers. He wanted to crush me under the weight of public opinion, and the first battleground was the City Hall of Asheville. The council chamber brimmed with reporters, community leaders, and curious citizens. Cameras perched on tripods pointed toward the podium where Sterling stood, his silver hair glowing beneath the harsh lights. He smiled as if he owned the room. "Progress is delayed," he declared, his voice carrying across the wooden rafters. "And it is delayed because my son is fixated on power. The community suffers while he plays gatekeeper." I sat in the second row, my pulse hammering. Every head turned when I rose. The folder in my hand was worn from nights of rereading Everett's letter, folded neatly at the front. "My grandfather wrote these words," I said, steadying my voice. "Protect others first. That is the principle guiding me. This project is not mine to exploit. It belongs to Asheville, and I will safeguard it with everything I have." A ripple spread through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. For the first time, Sterling's certainty seemed to falter. But the attack was not just rhetorical. At the construction site by the lake, Micah and I found shipments of glass panels stacked behind tarps. At first glance, they looked identical to the approved material, but the quality was inferior, brittle enough to crack in winter frost. The contractor had swapped them in, cutting corners and pocketing the difference. Sterling's signature was buried in the paperwork. We took the evidence straight to Amara. She moved quickly, filing an injunction that blocked the contract and replaced the supplier with a local firm that met Everett's standards. Within days, word spread through town that the Caldwell heir had stopped a dangerous shortcut. Wanting to build trust beyond documents, I organized a weekend workshop by the lakeside, inviting children to paint murals on temporary walls that would later line the community hall. The laughter of children mixing with the sound of brushes was louder than any headline Sterling could buy. The local paper ran a piece titled, "Jet Grayson Carries Everett's Torch." For the first time, strangers in coffee shops nodded at me with respect instead of suspicion. Sterling appeared on site not long after. His shoes sank into the damp soil as he approached, eyes hard as stone. "You think you've won a round," he said quietly. "But you've only just opened the war." I met his stare without lowering mine. It was the first time in my life I didn't flinch under his voice. That night, an official envelope arrived. The city council was instituting monthly oversight sessions for the project, open to the press and public. Every argument, every signature, every misstep would be displayed under bright lights. I understood immediately what it meant. The fight had moved onto a stage Sterling could no longer control alone. It would either expose him or destroy me. By November, the cultural center stood nearly complete, its glass facade catching the pale sun and reflecting the Blue Ridge peaks. The air carried the bite of approaching winter. The final oversight session before the grand opening was scheduled at City Hall. The chamber was packed, cameras buzzing, anticipation heavy in the air. Sterling arrived in a tailored suit, carrying a folder as though it contained divine truth. When his turn came, he spread the papers across the desk. "Evidence," he announced, "that my son has diverted funds from this project for personal gain." Gasps rolled through the room. Flashbulbs exploded. My throat tightened as I scanned the documents projected onto the screen. My name and signature stared back at me, authorizing wire transfers I had never seen. The floor seemed to shift beneath me. Then Amara rose, calm, precise, and walked to the microphone. "These documents are fraudulent," she said. She held up the originals Everett had archived. "The signature is fabricated. Our analysis proves it." She placed the forged sheets beside the authentic records, the differences stark under the magnifier. The chamber erupted in voices. Some reporters leaned forward, eyes wide. Others whispered to one another. Sterling's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. Cornered, he changed tactics. "I'm not here to fight my son," he said, his tone breaking into false humility. "I only want this center finished. He is the one who wants everything for himself." A murmur of uncertainty spread among the crowd. For a moment, doubt flickered in their eyes. Micah stepped forward, carrying a set of samples. "If we're talking about integrity," he said, "then let us look at the glass." He placed 2 panels on the table, one of the substandard material Sterling had tried to slip in and one of the certified product we had secured. He held them to the light, explaining the risks the weaker glass posed to safety and cost. Reporters leaned in, snapping photos. Within hours, the story traveled. Jet Grayson stops sabotage of cultural center. Sterling's composure finally cracked. His voice rose, echoing off the chamber walls. He pointed at me, shouting accusations, his anger spilling into the microphones. The very spectacle Everett had predicted unfolded in front of the community. Public discord, undeniable, documented by every lens in the room. I sat frozen, heart pounding. But underneath the fear was a pulse of something steadier. For the first time, the imbalance was visible to everyone, not just me. When the council adjourned, their verdict was clear. The project would continue under strict supervision, and the record would show Sterling's outburst for what it was. Outside, the press swarmed with questions, their attention divided, but no longer tilted entirely against me. As I stepped into the cold November air, the courthouse clock chiming above me, I knew the next clash would not be in council chambers or legal filings. It would come at the grand opening, under the glass and steel my grandfather envisioned, when light and shadow would finally confront each other without disguise. December arrived with a brittle blue sky that seemed made for glass and light. The French Broad Cultural Center gleamed in the winter sun, its wide windows catching every ray and throwing it back against the mountains. The plaza was packed, artists laying out their work on easels, food stalls curling smoke into the air, music spilling from fiddles and guitars. Asheville had turned out in full force. I waited behind the stage, palms damp, heart beating in a rhythm too fast. Everett's words surfaced in my mind like a hand on my shoulder. "Wealth means nothing unless it lifts others." The mayor finished his introduction, and before I could take a step forward, Sterling strode past me. He seized the microphone with a practiced flourish. "This," he proclaimed, his voice booming, "is the legacy of the Caldwell family. Years of work, sacrifice, and vision brought us here today." Polite applause rolled across the crowd, but it lacked warmth. I stood at the edge of the stage, watching the tightness in people's faces, the unease behind their clapping. Sterling was claiming what did not belong to him. Amara moved closer, a folder tucked under her arm. Her voice was low, sharp enough to cut. If he keeps denying you, I'll read the clause aloud right now. He knows what that means. Sterling glanced back, catching her eyes, and for the first time, I saw something flicker across his expression. Fear, however brief. Still, he clung to the microphone. I stepped forward, not to wrestle the mic from his hand, but to speak beside him, my voice carrying across the plaza. We're not here today for a single name, I said. We are here because of a shared vision. Everett Caldwell taught me that wealth only matters when it flows toward the community. That is what stands before us now, something built not for possession, but for all. The applause that followed was not polite. It was full-throated, genuine, rising from the heart of the crowd. Cameras snapped. Sterling lowered the microphone, suddenly small in the space he had tried to dominate. When it came time for the ribbon cutting, I held the scissors with Micah at one side and a line of children at the other, their paint-stained hands clutching the bright red strip. Sterling remained in the front row, stiff and silent, his face pale with rage. As the ribbon fell, sunlight pierced through the glass walls and spilled across the plaza. It caught in the murals the children had painted, spread across the stone like a blessing. The cheer rose, swallowing Sterling's silence. I let him sit there, invisible in the front row, while I gave the spotlight back to Everett's name and to the people Everett had always believed in. That night, the papers carried a single headline: Jet Grayson, guardian of the Caldwell legacy. The opening passed into memory, but its echoes lingered in every conversation on the streets. Days later, Micah's first exhibition filled the center. Light poured over canvases painted by local artists, the scent of pine from wreaths along the windows mixing with the murmur of guests. Sterling was nowhere to be seen. His name filled the newspapers, instead attached to words he had never wanted near him: forgery, sabotage, disgrace. The forged documents he had tried to wield were dissected in print. He still possessed his inheritance, but without the spotlight he had starved for. The community had turned away, their judgment final in its silence. The legal formalities concluded. Under Everett's will, I received 3 properties: the Mountain Lodge, where I had once hidden from Sterling's storms, a downtown apartment, and the lakefront land on which the center stood. They were more than assets. They were anchors, proof that independence had finally become something solid under my feet. During the exhibition, a girl no older than 8 tugged at my sleeve. She handed me a drawing, Everett and me standing side by the lake, with the glass building rising behind us. My throat closed. For a moment, it was as if he were still here, watching, nodding. Later that evening, Eloise led me to a drawer inside the director's office. She placed a sealed envelope in my hands. Everett's handwriting stretched across the paper. If you are reading this, it means you have protected more people than your father ever could. That is the greatest victory I could ask of you. I read the words in silence. The noise of the exhibition muffled through the glass. Something within me, coiled tight for months, maybe years, unraveled. The circle had closed. I stepped outside as the evening fell, the center glowing behind me. The lake mirrored the lights, a calm surface that seemed to hold both the past and the promise of tomorrow. Called useless, I whispered to the water. But uselessness opened a path to something real. Sterling has his money. I have the legacy, and I have freedom. The anger still pulsed faintly, but I let it drift with the cold air, no longer mine to carry. I left it with Sterling, with his shadows. A child's laughter rang from inside the center. I looked back once, then walked down the stone path toward the lake's edge, the light catching on the water, guiding me forward. Justice had been done, but more than that, I was free, and freedom was the only inheritance I truly needed. A month had passed since the grand opening, and the town still carried the glow of that December day. The center by the lake had become more than glass and stone. It had become a heartbeat. I could feel it each time I stepped through the doors. Children's laughter echoed through the halls. Artists filled the walls with colors, and the community came alive in a way Everett had always envisioned. Yet in the background, like a shadow that refused to vanish, Sterling lingered. He hadn't disappeared as I expected. Instead, he tried to claw his way back. I heard from reporters that he was making quiet visits to city officials, promising them donations, offering favors, hinting at new investments if they helped him push me aside. He wanted to reassert himself as the sole Caldwell name tied to the center, the public face of a legacy he had already poisoned. At first, I ignored it. I wanted to believe silence would weaken him faster than confrontation. But then I received a call from a council member who had been approached. Sterling had offered him money to push for a new committee that would rebrand the project, stripping my name and Everett's from the banners. It wasn't just pathetic, It was a direct insult to the memory of the man who had built all of this. Amara came to the loft that evening with a folder in her hands. "He forged letters again," she said, laying down the evidence. "He's desperate, but this time he went too far. There are officials willing to testify that he tried to bribe them." I sat at my desk, the weight of it pressing on my chest. I could take this to court, drag him into hearings, expose him until there was nothing left. Or I could let his schemes collapse on their own, leaving him to stew in the silence of his own undoing. For hours, I wrestled with it. Every instinct screamed for me to finally cut him down. But then I remembered Everett's voice: "Strength is not in how you strike back, but in what you protect." So, I chose restraint. The newspapers didn't. Within a week, they ran headlines detailing Sterling's attempted bribes. Photographs of him leaving the offices in anger, his face twisted, appeared across the front pages. Editorials painted him as a man consumed by envy, clinging to relevance he no longer had. The community turned away. Even the contractors he once manipulated refused to answer his calls. One evening, walking along the French Broad, I saw him sitting alone at the dock, his shoulders hunched, his reflection broken in the black water. For a moment, he looked not like the tyrant who had tried to ruin me, but like a man defeated by his own hunger. I stopped a few paces away, the cold air stinging my lungs.
He didn't look up. He didn't speak.
He just sat there, surrounded by silence that weighed heavier than any courtroom sentence could have delivered. I walked on, leaving him to his own emptiness. For the first time, I felt no fear of him. He had gambled everything and lost the only currency he truly worshipped: attention. By spring, the center had become the heart of Asheville. Micah organized the first major exhibition, bringing together painters, sculptors, musicians, and photographers from across the region. The halls glowed with light spilling from the glass panels, reflecting the mountains and the lake. The place no longer carried the tension of battles fought. It carried joy, discovery, and pride. I arrived early, walking through the gallery as artists pinned the last pieces. Children ran with brushes in their hands, leaving smudges of paint on their clothes. Volunteers prepared tables with food from local kitchens. There was music warming up outside. It felt alive, like the building itself breathed. At the entrance, a little girl tugged at my sleeve. She couldn't have been more than 7, her hands stained with paint. She held out a small sketchbook. On the first page was a simple drawing: Everett and me standing side by the lake, sunlight spreading across the water. Above it, in shaky letters, she had written, "Keep the light alive." My chest tightened as I knelt down, holding her close and pressing the sketchbook firmly against me. She darted back to rejoin her friends, leaving me stunned with a weight I hadn't prepared for: the undeniable proof that the legacy was no longer mine alone to bear. It was already spreading, already alive in the hands of the next generation. Later that night, Eloise stepped into the director's office and gave me an envelope she had found hidden in the back of Everett's old desk drawer. My fingers shook as I unfolded it and saw his handwriting flow across the paper. "If you are reading this, you have already done more than I ever dreamed. You chose to protect people, not riches. That is the victory our family truly needed. You will feel tempted to despise your father forever. Let him carry that burden. You, my son, are free." My eyes blurred with tears as I folded the letter back, then returned to the gallery where voices and laughter filled the air, music drifting through the glowing windows. Micah caught my gaze and lifted his glass. Amara smiled warmly across the room. The crowd moved together as one, and for the first time in years, I felt the rare gift of belonging. When the evening faded, I stepped out onto the terrace. The lake stretched quietly under the stars, reflecting the golden shimmer of the center's lights. I opened my journal and wrote my last line: "Sterling may still hold the money, but I hold something far greater, a community that trusts me, and that is the only fortune no one can ever take away." Closing the book, I inhaled the crisp spring air, the sounds of laughter and music still trailing behind me as living proof that Everett's dream had survived. Ahead of me, the lantern-lit path curved gently along the lakeside, placed by the hands of volunteers. I walked it slowly, each step carrying me further from Sterling's shadow and deeper into the light guiding the future I would now build. The Caldwell name no longer weighed me down as a curse, it became my promise. What you followed here is not merely a struggle over inheritance, nor just the conflict of father and son. It is about something more profound: the choice to either repeat the darkness of those before us or break free and forge something brighter. Jet discovered that true legacy is never measured by accounts or deeds, but by the lives uplifted, the voices empowered, and the strength of a community that rises because one person chose to stand firm. Sterling's hunger for power left him in solitude, while Jet's decision to protect instead of retaliate gave him the treasures that can never be stolen: trust, belonging, and freedom. The center by the lake grew into more than stone and walls. It became a reflection of Everett's vision, proof that light will always find its way through even the deepest shadows. And now, as we close this chapter, I ask you to pause and reflect on your own path. What are you guarding? What legacy will you pass forward? It may not be vast or public, but even the smallest act of honesty, bravery, or kindness can send ripples farther than you imagine. If this story has touched you, if in its echoes of struggle and renewal you've glimpsed your own, then stay with us. Subscribe now, so you won't miss the next journey into the hidden truths of betrayal and redemption. Each tale brings a new chance to reflect, to mend, and to step closer to your own story of light.